She gave him 10 years of her life, her youth, her everything. In return, he made her invisible, a ghost in her own home, while he flaunted his beautiful mistress Chloe in her face. He thought she was weak, plain, and utterly dependent. But he was wrong. After 5 years of silence, she walked back into his world, a goddess of success and beauty. He and his mistress looked right through her, dismissing the woman they had once broken. They didn't recognize the masterpiece born from their cruelty. Not until it was far, far too late. This is the story of Anna's revenge. The clinking of ice in Julian's whiskey glass was the only punctuation in the suffocating silence of their penthouse apartment. It was a sound Anna had come to associate with humiliation. It was the sound of another Tuesday night, another evening where her husband, Julian Croft, a man whose name was synonymous with tech money and ruthless ambition, treated her like a piece of furniture he'd forgotten he owned. Anna sat opposite him on a cream-colored sofa that had cost more than her parents' first car. She was reading a book, or pretending to. The words swam on the page, meaningless black squiggles against a white backdrop. Her focus was entirely on him, on the taut line of his jaw, as he scrolled through his phone, a faint, cruel smile playing on his lips. She knew who he was texting. Chloe Vance. The name was a bitter poison on her tongue, even when left unspoken. Chloe was everything Anna wasn't. She was vibrant with a laugh that commanded attention and a body honed by expensive trainers and a dietitian's strict regimen. She was a brand consultant, a vague, glamorous title that seemed to involve attending endless parties and being photographed on Julian's arm. Their affair wasn't a secret. It was a public spectacle. Julian had paraded Chloe at charity galas, at product launches, even at a family Christmas party, where Anna's own mother had to pretend not to see the proprietary hand Chloe placed on Julian's back. "Did you need something?" Julian's voice sliced through the quiet. He hadn't looked up from his phone. Anna's heart did its familiar, painful thud. It was the question of a man bothered by a persistent fly. She lowered her book. "I was just wondering if you'd thought any more about the fundraiser for the children's hospital. The one I'm helping to organize. We need to finalize the corporate sponsorship list by Friday." He finally lifted his eyes, and the look in them was one of pure, unadulterated boredom. It was a look that said, "You and your little hobbies. Send the list to my assistant Maria. She'll handle it." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, his attention already back on the glowing screen. The faint smile returned. A new message from Chloe, no doubt. Anna felt a familiar wave of cold wash over her. It wasn't anger anymore. Anger had burned out long ago, leaving behind only the grey ash of resignation. She had been Anna Brown, a bright-eyed art history graduate with a passion for restoration when she met Julian. He had been charming, a whirlwind of confidence and power that had swept her off her feet. He'd loved her quiet nature, he'd said. It was a balm to his chaotic life. 10 years of marriage had revealed the truth. He didn't love her quiet nature. He loved her saunts. He loved that she didn't challenge him, that she managed his home with quiet efficiency, that she was a presentable, if unremarkable, backdrop to his dazzling life. She had faded bit by bit until she felt like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Her clothes were tasteful but bland, chosen to not draw attention. Her hair was always in a neat, simple bun. She hadn't bought a new tube of lipstick in 3 years. What was the point? The only person she wanted to see her didn't look at her anyway. The true turning point had come 6 months prior. It was their 10th anniversary. Anna had spent weeks planning a surprise. She'd booked a private chef, filled the apartment with peonies, his favorite flower, and wore the blue dress he'd once said made her eyes look like the ocean. He came home late, smelling of expensive perfume. Chloe's signature scent, a cloying gardenia that made Anna's stomach turn. He didn't notice the flowers, the chef, or the dress. He walked straight to the bedroom, pulling off his tie. Big day. He'd grunted not as an apology, but as a statement of fact. I'm exhausted. Think I'll just turn in early. Julian, she had whispered, her voice trembling. It's our anniversary. He had paused, his back to her. She saw his shoulders rise and fall in a sigh of pure exasperation. Anna, for God's sake. It's just a day. We've been married for 10 years. What's the big deal? He'd turned then, and his eyes, cold and hard, had finally met hers. Don't be so needy. It's unbecoming. The word had struck her like a physical blow. Needy. Her who asked for nothing. Her who swallowed his blatant infidelity with a pained smile. Her who ran his life from the shadows so he could shine in the spotlight. That night, something inside her had fractured. The hope she'd clung to, the foolish belief that the old Julian was still in there somewhere, had finally died. Now watching him text his mistress in the home she had so carefully curated for them, the fracture became a clean break. She stood up. The movement was so sudden, it actually startled him. He looked up, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. What now? I'm going to my sister's for a few days, she said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. The decision once made felt less like a leap and more like a simple step onto solid ground. Julian shrugged his thumb, already swiping across the screen. Fine. The guest room sheets are clean. He assumed, as he always did, that her life, her plans, her entire existence revolved around his. He didn't ask why. He didn't care. Anna walked into their cavernous bedroom. The closet was the size of a small boutique. On one side hung Julian's bespoke suits and designer shirts. On the other, her own wardrobe of beige, grey, and navy. She packed a small suitcase, not with the muted colors of her current life, but with the few remnants of the woman she used to be. A pair of worn jeans, a soft paint-stained t-shirt, her old art supplies. She took her passport, her personal bank card with the meager savings she had squirreled away from the household budget, and the small, tarnished silver locket her grandmother had given her. As she walked past the living room, Julian was still on the sofa, bathed in the blue light of his phone. He didn't look up. He didn't say goodbye. She closed the heavy oak door of the penthouse behind her, the soft click echoing the final silent closing of a chapter of her life. The doorman, a kind man named George, tipped his hat. Have a good evening, Mrs. Croft. You too. George, she said, a real smile touching her lips for the first time in months. Outside, the city air was cool and crisp. Anna didn't go to her sister's. She walked to the nearest ATM, withdrew all her savings, and hailed a taxi. Grand Central Station, please, she said, her voice clear and strong. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, she took one last look at the glittering tower where she had lost herself. Julian wouldn't even notice she was gone. Not really. Not until his shirts weren't perfectly pressed or his favorite brand of coffee ran out. And by then she would be long gone. She wasn't Mrs. Croft anymore. She was just Anna. And for the first time in a decade, that felt like enough. The ghost was leaving the building, and she wasn't looking back. The first year was the hardest. Anna didn't vanish into a glamorous new life overnight. She fled to a place where Julian would never think to look for her, a small, gritty city in the Rust Belt, a place of brick warehouses and forgotten factories. It was the city her grandmother had emigrated to, a place Anna had only visited once as a child, but whose memory of honest, hard-working people felt like a safe harbor. She rented a tiny third-floor walk-up apartment that smelled of dust and old wood. For the first few weeks, she did little more than sleep. The exhaustion of a decade of silent suffering was a physical weight, and she let herself succumb to it. There were no schedules to keep, no dinners to plan, no passive-aggressive comments to deflect. The silence that had once been her prison was now her sanctuary. Her savings, which had felt substantial when she'd withdrawn them, dwindled with alarming speed. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. She was 34 years old with a 10-year gap in her resume and a degree that felt utterly useless in this new, pragmatic world. One rainy afternoon, staring at her reflection in the warped glass of her bathroom mirror, she finally confronted the woman she'd become. Her face was pale and puffy, her eyes dull, her hair lank and lifeless. She was the embodiment of neglect. That was the day the chrysalis began to form. It started not with a makeover, but with a decision. She would not let Julian Croft be the author of the final chapter of her life. Her first step was small. She found a job waiting tables at a local diner, a bustling place called the Corner Spot. The work was grueling. Her feet ached, her hands were raw from hot plates and harsh detergents, and the pay was barely enough to cover her rent and groceries. But for the first time in years, she felt useful. People looked at her, Healy looked at her. They smiled. They thanked her. They told her to have a good one. She was no longer invisible. She was Ellie, the quiet waitress who always remembered who took their coffee black. The physical labor began to change her. The puffiness in her face receded, replaced by the definition of her cheekbones. The constant motion toned her body in a way no expensive, unused gym membership ever had. She started walking everywhere, exploring her new city on foot, feeling the strength return to her legs. With her first few paychecks, she didn't buy designer clothes. She bought art supplies, canvases, oils, brushes. In the evenings after her shifts, she would climb the 3 flights of stairs to her little apartment, put on some music and paint. At first, her canvases were filled with dark, tumultuous swirls of grey and black. It was the pain, the anger, the humiliation all pouring out of her onto the canvas. It was a messy, painful but necessary exorcism. Slowly, colour began to seep back in. She started painting the city she was discovering, the intricate rust patterns on an old fire escape, the vibrant graffiti on a forgotten brick wall, the way the morning light hit the stained glass windows of a derelict church. She was rediscovering her passion, the very thing Julian had once dismissed as a cute hobby. A regular at the diner, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, who owned a small furniture shop, noticed her paint-stained fingers. He asked to see her work. Hesitantly, Anna invited him to her apartment one afternoon. He stood for a long time in her small living room, which was now more studio than home, his gaze moving from canvas to canvas. "My dear," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't see rust and decay. You see stories. You see beauty." The next week, Mr. Henderson cleared out his shop window and displayed 3 of Anna's paintings. He put a simple handwritten card next to them. "Local scenes by Ellie T. 2 of them sold within 3 days. The money was more than she made in 2 weeks at the diner. But it was the validation that truly mattered. Someone saw value in her vision. This small success was the catalyst. Anna, now Ellie, enrolled in a business course at the local community college. She learned about marketing, about pricing, about building a brand. She started an Instagram account, posting high-quality photos of her work. She began visiting local art fairs, not as a browser, but as a vendor. Her style was unique. She combined her classic art history, training with the raw industrial aesthetic of her surroundings. She developed a technique for incorporating found objects, bits of metal, old gears, fragments of glass into her paintings, giving them a rich, textured, three-dimensional quality. Her work was a conversation between the past and the present, between decay and rebirth. It was the story of her own transformation, told in oil and rust. As her art business grew, so did her confidence. She cut her hair into a chic, sharp bob that framed her face. She started dressing in a way that reflected her artistic sensibilities, bold colors, interesting textures, and unique, handcrafted jewelry. She learned to love her own company, but she also built a new community. She made friends with other artists, with the gruff but kind owner of the diner, with the quiet librarian who recommended books to her. She also started therapy. Unpacking a decade of emotional abuse was painful. She cried for the woman she had been, for the years she had lost. But her therapist helped her understand that her gentleness was not a weakness, and that her desire for a loving partnership was not neediness. She learned to set boundaries, to value her own opinion, and to say no. By the end of the 5th year, the woman who had fled Julian Croft's penthouse was gone. In her place stood Anna Brown, a name that was beginning to generate a buzz in the national art scene. She owned her own gallery now, a beautiful space in a renovated warehouse downtown. Her work was being sought after by collectors and corporate clients. She was financially independent, emotionally resilient, and radiantly self-assured. One morning she was in her gallery supervising the installation of a new exhibit when her assistant, a young, eager art student named Ben, handed her a glossy magazine. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his eyes wide. "Page 72. Anna took the magazine. It was a high society publication, the kind she used to find on the coffee table of her old life. And there, on page 72, was a full-page spread on the upcoming Starlight Gala, the biggest charity event of the year in her old city. The chairman of the event was listed as Julian Croft, and on his arm, in the accompanying photo, smiling brilliantly, was Chloe Vance, now listed as Chloe Croft. They had gotten married. A younger Anna would have felt a stab of pain, a bitter twist of jealousy. But looking at the photo now, she felt nothing. A strange, clinical detachment. They looked like two strangers in a photograph, frozen in a world that no longer had anything to do with her. Ben pointed to the list of major sponsors. "Look," he said, his finger tapping the page. "The Croft Foundation is the main sponsor, of course, but look at the corporate art partner." Anna's eyes followed his finger, and there in elegant script was the name of the company commissioned to provide the centerpiece art installation for the gala, Brown Studios. Her studio. The Starlight Gala. The pinnacle of the world she had run away from. And they wanted her, or rather her work, as their main attraction. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost comical. Ben was looking at her, waiting for a reaction. He didn't know her history. To him, this was just a massive career opportunity. A slow smile spread across Anna's face. It was a real smile, confident and genuine. The chrysalis hadn't just broken. It had shattered, revealing something stronger and more beautiful than she could ever have imagined. "Ben," she said, her voice calm and clear, "call them. Tell them we accept. And book me a ticket. It's time I went back for a visit." The ballroom of the Astoria Hotel was a galaxy of manufactured stars. Crystals dripped from the chandeliers like frozen rain, casting fractured light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air hummed with the curated buzz of old money, and new, a symphony of champagne flutes, discreet laughter, and the relentless networking of the city's elite. This was the Starlight Gala, Julian Croft's annual monument to his own philanthropy and power. At the center of the room, cordoned off by velvet ropes, stood the artistic centerpiece of the evening. It was a sculpture, but that word felt too small, too static. It was an installation, a living piece of art titled Echoes of Rebirth. 3 massive translucent panels, each over 10 feet high, were arranged in a gentle curve. Embedded within the polished resin were the ghosts of industrial decay-rusted gears that seemed to float in mid-air, delicate lattices of oxidized copper and fragments of iridescent shattered glass. Yet woven through this metallic skeleton were veins of pure, brilliant color, streaks of sapphire blue, emerald green, and a fiery, defiant crimson. Hidden lights pulsed from within, causing the colors to shift and shimmer, making the rusted metal seem to breathe. It was breathtaking, a powerful statement on the beauty that could be forged from ruin. The artist, the program noted, was a rising star named Anna Brown, a name that meant nothing to Julian Croft. He'd barely glanced at the proposal delegating the artsy stuff to the event committee. His focus was on the real prize, the multi-million-dollar donations he would extract from the city's wealthiest patrons before the night was over. He stood near the entrance, a king surveying his court. At his side, Chloe Croft shimmered in a silver dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her blonde hair was swept up in an intricate style that must have taken hours, and the diamond necklace at her throat, Julian's latest I love you, was blinding. She was the perfect accessory, the beautiful, polished wife of a millionaire. "Darling, you've outdone yourself," she murmured, squeezing his arm. "Everyone is here." "Of course they are," Julian said, his eyes scanning the crowd, calculating net worths. "It's the only ticket that matters." He was in his element, powerful, admired, and in control. The ghost of his first wife, the plain, mousy woman, whose name he hadn't uttered in 5 years, was a distant, faded memory. He'd heard she'd moved somewhere dreary and insignificant. He'd paid her out a paltry sum mandated by their prenup and had his lawyers handle the divorce. It was a clean, efficient amputation of a part of his life that no longer served him. It was then that she walked in. He didn't notice her at first. His attention was snagged by the collective ripple that went through the room, the subtle turning of heads, the sudden pause in conversations. It was the kind of entrance that usually heralded the arrival of a movie star or a foreign royal. His eyes followed the crowd's gaze toward the grand archway. The woman standing there was not a movie star. He would have known her. This woman was different. She wore a simple floor-length gown of deep emerald green silk. It was a bold, striking color, yet the cut was exquisitely understated. It didn't cling or sparkle. It flowed. Her hair was a sharp, dark bob that gleamed under the chandeliers, framing a face that was both elegant and arresting. High cheekbones, a strong jawline, and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet, knowing power. A single magnificent piece of jewelry, a hand-crafted silver pendant, reminiscent of the sculpture in the center of the room, rested against her collarbone. She wasn't conventionally beautiful like Chloe. She was something more compelling. She was art. "Who is that?" Chloe whispered, a rare note of insecurity in her voice. She felt a primal feminine threat. This woman wasn't playing the same game as her. She was operating on a different plane entirely. Julian grunted, his eyes narrowed. I don't know. Probably some artist. The one who did the sculpture, I imagine. He dismissed her with the same casual arrogance he applied to anyone he deemed unimportant. She was staff, essentially. The woman began to move through the room. She didn't work the crowd or seek anyone out. She simply walked, her posture perfect, her gaze forward, a small, serene smile on her lips. People parted for her, their eyes following her. She was heading toward the sculpture. Her path would take her directly past Julian and Chloe. As she drew closer, Julian got a better look at her face. There was something, a flicker of something familiar in the curve of her smile, in the shape of her eyes. It was like hearing a half-forgotten melody, a ghost of a memory he couldn't quite place. He dismissed it. A trick of the light. She was now only a few feet away. The event photographer, sensing a moment, raised his camera. The chairman of the gala and his beautiful wife and the mysterious artist. A perfect shot. Chloe, ever conscious of appearances, pasted on a brilliant smile. Julian adopted a look of magnanimous patronage. This woman was, after all, contributing to his event. The artist, Anna Brown, paused as she reached them. Her gaze, cool and impersonal, swept over Chloe's glittering dress, then to Julian's perfectly tailored tuxedo. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met Julian's, and in that moment, he felt nothing. No recognition, no spark of memory. He was looking at a complete stranger, a slightly interesting but ultimately irrelevant stranger. A wonderful piece, Julian said, his voice booming with false sincerity. He gestured vaguely toward the sculpture. A real conversation starter. Well done. It was the kind of praise one gives to a caterer for a well-arranged canapé. The woman's smile didn't waver. It was polite, distant, and utterly unreadable. Thank you, Mr. Croft, she said. Her voice was low and smooth, with a timbre that was somehow both gentle and unbreakable. I'm so glad it meets with your approval. She then turned her gaze to Chloe. Mrs. Croft, she said with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. That's a lovely necklace. Chloe preened, touching the diamonds at her throat. Thank you. Julian has impeccable taste. The artist's smile widened slightly, a subtle shift at the corner of her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. He certainly does, she agreed softly. And then she was gone. She simply continued her serene path toward her sculpture, leaving Julian and Chloe standing in her wake. The moment had passed. The photographer, disappointed, lowered his camera. Julian turned back to the crowd, already dismissing the brief interaction. But the ghost of a melody was still there, nagging at the edge of his consciousness. Brown. Anna Brown. The name was common enough. And the voice. He certainly does. There was an echo in it, a phantom resonance that he couldn't place. Chloe was chattering beside him about someone's dreadful choice of shoes, but Julian wasn't listening. He was watching the artist. She was being greeted by the director of the City Museum of Modern Art, a man who had snubbed Julian at a fundraiser just last month. They were shaking hands, the director's face lit with genuine admiration. Anna. The name echoed again, this time with more force. Anna. The fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. I'm helping to organize it. The quiet woman on the cream sofa, the simple bun, the beige cardigans, the wife he had erased. His blood ran cold. He looked back at the artist, who was now laughing at something the museum director had said. Her whole face was transformed by the laugh, vibrant and alive. He tried to superimpose the image of his mousy, timid first wife onto this radiant, confident woman. It was impossible. They were two different people. And yet, he saw it. A tiny, almost invisible scar just above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall she'd once told him about. The way she tilted her head when she was listening intently. The specific, unique shade of dark chocolate in her eyes, now sparkling with life under the chandeliers. The whiskey he'd had earlier curdled in his stomach. The air in the opulent ballroom suddenly felt thin, suffocating. He turned to Chloe, his face pale. "What is it, darling?" she asked, her smile faltering at his expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Julian's gaze was fixed on the woman across the room, the artist, the stranger, the woman he had looked right through, the woman he had praised like a servant, the woman who was impossibly, undeniably his first wife. "I think I have," he whispered, the full weight of his colossal mistake beginning to crash down upon him. It was too late. The encounter had happened. The dismissal was complete. And the woman he had failed to recognize was now the most captivating person in the room. The recognition did not hit Julian like a lightning bolt. It was more like the slow, sickening creep of a tide of ice water. One moment, he was Julian Croft, master of the universe, standing at the pinnacle of his own glittering event. The next, he was a man staring into an abyss of his own making. "That's not possible," he breathed more to himself than to Chloe. "What's not possible?" Chloe demanded, her voice sharp with irritation. His sudden pallor was ruining the mood. "Julian, what is wrong with you?" He couldn't answer. His mind was a frantic scramble of mismatched images. The quiet, submissive woman leaving his apartment with a small suitcase, and the radiant, self-possessed artist holding court by her magnificent sculpture. The two realities refused to merge. How could the drab, colorless caterpillar he'd discarded have possibly transformed into this butterfly? And not just any butterfly, but one with wings of steel. He watched as the city's mayor, a man he'd been trying to get a meeting with for months, approached Anna, shaking her hand with genuine enthusiasm. The chairman of the board of the city's largest bank joined the conversation, laughing at something she said. She was not on the fringes of this world anymore. She was its gravitational center. "I need a drink," Julian muttered, pushing past a bewildered Chloe and stalking toward the bar. He ordered a Scotch neat and downed it in one fiery gulp. The alcohol did nothing to steady his nerves. It only sharpened the edges of his panic. He had dismissed her. He had looked the woman who shared his bed for a decade in the eye and patronized her. A wonderful piece. Well done. The memory of his own pompous, condescending words made him sick. He hadn't just failed to recognize her. He had insulted her on the grandest possible stage in front of everyone who mattered. Meanwhile, Chloe's finely tuned social radar was blaring alarms. She had seen the look on Julian's face. This wasn't about a bad business deal or a market fluctuation. This was personal. Her eyes darted back to the artist Anna Brown. Who was she? The name was vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. Chloe's world was curated to exclude anything or anyone that didn't directly benefit her, and a mousy first wife was definitely not on the list. She intercepted one of the junior members of the gala committee, a young woman named Tiffany. "That artist," Chloe said, feigning casual interest. "Anna Brown. What's her story?" Tiffany's eyes lit up. "Oh, she's amazing. A total genius. Came out of nowhere a few years ago. Her gallery, Brown Studios, is one of the hottest in the country. They say she turned down a commission from a sheikh in Dubai to do this piece for us. Can you believe it? We're so lucky to have her." Tiffany leaned in conspiratorially. "And between us, Mr. Croft got her for a steal. Her usual fee for a work this size is nearly double what the committee approved." Chloe's painted smile felt brittle enough to crack. Not only was this woman a success, but she was a bargain Julian had stumbled into. The thought was galling. She thanked Tiffany and glided back to Julian's side at the bar. "So the artist is apparently a big deal," she said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Funny I don't remember you ever mentioning her." Julian's knuckles were white as he gripped his empty glass. "Her name..." It didn't register. The committee handled it. "The committee," Chloe's voice was laced with disbelief. "Julian, you approve every line item on the budget. You knew exactly who you were hiring." She paused, a dreadful suspicion dawning. She remembered snippets of conversations from years ago, Julian complaining about his divorce. A name. A quiet, artsy woman. Anna. Her blood ran cold. "Oh my God," she whispered, her eyes wide with horror as she looked from Julian's ashen face to the woman across the room. "That's her. That's your first wife." The question hung in the air between them, ugly and undeniable. It wasn't just that Julian had failed to recognize his ex-wife. It was that the woman he had replaced her with, the woman who had helped him discard her, was so spectacularly outshone. Chloe, in her glittering, expensive gown, suddenly felt cheap. Her beauty was bought and paid for a curated accessory. Anna's radiance was earned a light that shone from within. The fallout began almost immediately, though subtly at first. The story of the brief, dismissive encounter began to circulate. It was too delicious to ignore. Julian Croft, the man who prided himself on knowing everyone and everything, had snubbed the Tsar of his own party. The initial whispers were of his arrogance. But then someone connected the dots. An older board member with a long memory recalled the first Mrs. Croft, that quiet girl who used to attend these things on Julian's arm. The story mutated, becoming infinitely more scandalous. He hadn't just snubbed the artist. He had snubbed his own ex-wife, the woman he'd cast aside. And he hadn't even recognized her. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The glances thrown Julian's way were no longer just admiring. They were speculative, laced with a delicious dose of schadenfreude. People looked from Julian and Chloe with their strained, frozen smiles to Anna, who seemed completely oblivious, calmly discussing her work with a circle of admirers. The contrast was devastating. He was the past, loud and brutish. She was the future, elegant and serene. Julian felt the shift in power like a change in atmospheric pressure. He tried to recover, to work the room, but his swagger was gone. His jokes fell flat. His handshake felt less like a power move and more like a desperate plea. He saw people whispering behind their hands as he approached. He had become a caricature, a punchline at his own party. For Chloe, it was a waking nightmare. Her entire identity was built on being Mrs. Julian Croft, the glamorous, envied woman who had won. But tonight, she was a cosmic loser. She saw the pitying looks from the other women, the smug smirks. They were all thinking the same thing. He left his wife for you, and his wife came back a queen. Her diamond necklace suddenly felt like a heavy, vulgar chain. The final crushing blow came during the live auction. The final item was a private commission from the artist herself, Anna Brown. When the auctioneer announced the lot, a wave of excited murmurs went through the crowd. The bidding was fierce, climbing rapidly into the six figures. Julian, in a desperate, misguided attempt to seize back control, to prove something, he wasn't even sure what, entered the bidding. 200,000! He boomed his voice a little too loud. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to him, then to Anna, who was standing near the stage. She registered his bid with a flicker of an expression. Was it surprise? Amusement? It was impossible to tell. Her face was a mask of polite neutrality. Another bidder immediately countered. 225, 250. Julian shot back. His face flushed. Chloe grabbed his arm. "Julian, stop it," she hissed. "What are you doing?" He shook her off. This was about more than a painting. This was about reclaiming his narrative. He would own a piece of her success. He would force her to deal with him. The price climbed. 300,000. 350. Julian was bidding against a rival tech billionaire, a man he despised. It became a testosterone-fueled war of egos played out in front of the city's elite. $500,000, Julian yelled, his voice cracking slightly. The room gasped. The auctioneer looked to Anna. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Then she stepped forward and took the microphone. "Thank you all for your incredible generosity," she said, her calm voice carrying through the silent ballroom. "And thank you, Mr. Croft, for your very enthusiastic bidding." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "However, I must respectfully withdraw this item from the auction." The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. Anna raised a hand for silence. "My studio has a policy." She continued, her gaze sweeping coolly over the stunned audience before landing for a brief, devastating moment on Julian. "We do not engage in private commissions solicited through public spectacle. My art is not a trophy to be won in a bidding war." She smiled a serene, unshakable smile. "Instead, I will be donating a new original piece to the Children's Hospital directly. Thank you." She handed the microphone back to the stunned auctioneer, and with a final graceful nod to the crowd, she turned and walked off the stage. She didn't look at Julian again. She didn't have to. The humiliation was absolute. She hadn't just rejected his money. She had rejected his entire world, its values, its power games. She had exposed his desperate bid for what it was, a pathetic, vulgar display. In one quiet, elegant move, she had checkmated him completely. The fallout was no longer just whispers and gossip. It was a mushroom cloud, and Julian and Chloe were standing at ground zero. The days following the Starlight Gala were a masterclass in social and professional implosion for Julian and Chloe Croft. The story of the encounter became the city's favorite piece of gossip, retold with increasing embellishment at every charity luncheon and country club dinner. It had all the elements of a perfect scandal: arrogance, beauty, revenge, and a fall from grace. Julian wasn't just the man who didn't recognize his ex-wife. He was the fool who tried to buy her back in a public auction and was gently but firmly annihilated. The narrative had been seized from him, and he was now merely a character in Anna Brown's epic. His phone, usually an incessant source of validation, grew chillingly quiet. The first concrete sign of the shifting tides came 3 days after the gala. Julian was trying to close a major real estate deal, a partnership with a contemporary named Marcus Thorne. The final call should have been a formality. Instead, Marcus was evasive. "The board is getting cold feet." "Julian," Marcus said, his voice stripped of its usual camaraderie. "Cold feet, Marcus. The numbers are solid. This is a guaranteed win." There was a pause. "It's not about the numbers anymore. It's about optics." The gala was all anyone was talking about at the club this weekend. My partners feel that your personal brand is a little volatile right now. My personal brand? Julian scoffed the words, tasting like poison. What does that have to do with a real estate venture? It has everything to do with it, Marcus said, his tone now sharp and final. We're pulling out. I'm sorry. The line went dead. Julian stared at his phone, a vein throbbing in his temple. He had been dismissed, weighed, measured, and found wanting. Soon after, the board members of his own charitable foundation called an emergency meeting to discuss the reputational damage. His power, which he'd always believed was forged in his own brilliance, was revealed to be a fragile construct held together by the perception of others. And that perception had been shattered. For Chloe, the reckoning was more personal and perhaps more cruel. Her world was built on social currency, and her stock had plummeted to zero. She forced herself to attend a luncheon for the ballet, determined to face down the whispers. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. She was seated not at the head table, but at a marginal one near the kitchens. Women who had once fawned over her now offered tight, pitying smiles. Genevieve Astor, a woman whose social position Chloe had always envied and sought to usurp, glided over to her table. Chloe, darling, Genevieve cooed, her eyes gleaming with malicious delight. I saw the pictures from the gala. Such a dramatic evening. And your husband's first wife. What a talent. It just goes to show you never know who has hidden depths. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. Chloe was no longer the winner. She was the consolation prize, a footnote in the incredible story of Anna's rise. Their magnificent penthouse, once a symbol of their success, became a gilded cage. The silence that had once been Anna's torment now belonged to them. They circled each other in the vast, sterile rooms, the air thick with unspoken accusations. One evening, Julian slammed a copy of a lifestyle magazine onto the marble kitchen island. The cover story was a 10-page spread on Anna Brown titled The Phoenix of the Art World. It was filled with stunning photos of her work, her gallery, and of Anna herself looking serene and powerful. Look at this, he snarled, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. They're calling her a phoenix. What does that make me? The fire. Chloe, who had been nursing a glass of wine, looked up with dead eyes. It makes you the fool who let a phoenix fly away, so you could keep a parrot. The insult, so direct and vicious, hung between them. A parrot? Julian bellowed. I gave you everything. You were a glorified event planner before you met me. And you were married to a masterpiece you were too blind to see. She shrieked back, her voice cracking. You didn't just ruin yourself. Julian, you ruined me. Chloe blamed Julian for his staggering arrogance. Julian, in the dark, twisted logic of a narcissist, blamed Chloe for not being enough, for somehow allowing Anna to eclipse her so completely. 2 weeks after the gala, Julian finally cracked. Driven by a desperate, toxic cocktail of wounded pride, simmering rage, and a strange, unfamiliar longing, he did the one thing his lawyers would have screamed at him not to do. He went to Anna's gallery. Brown Studios was nothing like the stuffy, intimidating galleries of his world. It was a bright, airy space, with polished concrete floors and high ceilings flooded with natural light. The art on the walls was vibrant and alive. And at the back of the gallery, in a glass-walled office, sat Anna. She was not painting. She was on a conference call with a man on a large screen, and even from a distance, Julian could see the reverence in the man's expression. Anna was laughing a full, genuine laugh that echoed faintly in the gallery, looking relaxed, powerful, and utterly in control. She saw him approach through the glass. Her smile didn't falter. She calmly held up a finger, signaling him to wait. Finished her point to the man on screen and said, "Talk soon, Thomas." She clicked off the screen. Then she looked up at him, her expression placid, as if he were a mildly interesting stranger who had wandered in off the street. "Julian," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of fact. Her voice was even betraying no emotion. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" He stood awkwardly in the doorway of her office, the power dynamic of their entire marriage inverted. Here he was, the supplicant. She was the one in charge. "Anna, we need to talk," he began, his voice raspy. "Do we?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. "I feel like we said everything that needed to be said 10 years ago, and then again 5 years ago, and then I suppose 2 weeks ago at the gala." The casual, cutting accuracy of her words stung. "That night, I didn't recognize me," she finished for him, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "I know. It was quite obvious. In a way, I should thank you. It was the most honest moment our relationship has had in over a decade." The lack of anger in her voice was more disarming than any tirade would have been. He had come prepared for a fight for tears, for a dramatic confrontation. He was not prepared for this serene, untouchable calm. "I don't understand how this happened," he said, gesturing vaguely at the gallery, at her, at the whole impossible situation. "The woman I knew, she was quiet. She was simple. She would never have been able to do all this." For the first time, a flicker of something not anger, but a deep, profound sadness crossed Anna's face. "The woman you knew," she said softly, "was a person you never bothered to see. You saw a reflection of what you wanted, a quiet, convenient accessory. You didn't see the artist, the dreamer, the person with her own hopes and passions. You didn't water the plant, Julian, and then you were surprised when it didn't bloom in your shadow." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling street. "You didn't break me, you know. You just erased me. And in doing so, you gave me the most incredible gift. You gave me a blank canvas. I got to paint myself back into existence in my own colors on my own terms." Julian's desperation mounted. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. "I want to fix this," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I miss you." Anna turned from the window and laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a sound of genuine, unadulterated disbelief. "Oh, Julian," she said, shaking her head. "No, you don't. You don't miss me. You don't even know me. You miss the idea of me. You miss the comfort, the silence, the woman who made your life easy so you could pursue your ambitions and your affairs without interruption. And now you miss what I have. You see my success, the admiration of others, and you want to own it, just like you tried to own my art at the auction. You haven't changed at all." It was at that precise moment that the gallery's front door opened and Chloe walked in. She looked terrible. Her expensive clothes hung on her as if on a stranger, and her face was a mask of strained anxiety. She saw Julian, and her face hardened. "I knew it," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "I knew you'd come crawling back here." Anna looked from Julian's stunned face to Chloe's furious one. She sighed the sigh of a woman dealing with a tiresome, predictable drama. "This," Anna said, gesturing between the two of them. has absolutely nothing to do with me. Not anymore. She walked to her desk, picked up her bag, and slung it over her shoulder. I have a lunch meeting at the Modern with the curator from the Tate. That was him on the call. She let that detail land a final, effortless confirmation of the world she now inhabited. Ben can help you if you're interested in purchasing a piece. She paused and looked directly at Chloe, her gaze not unkind, but piercingly clear. And for what it's worth, he's your problem now. You built your house on stolen land. You can't be surprised when it has a shaky foundation. She walked past them out of her office and toward the front of the gallery. She paused at the door and looked back at the two of them standing frozen amidst the beautiful art born from her pain. They looked small and ugly in the bright, clean space. "Goodbye, Julian," she said, and the finality in her voice was absolute. It was the closing of a book, the turning off of a light, the final quiet fall of a curtain. Then she turned and walked out into the sunlight, leaving them behind in the beautiful echoing gallery, forever trapped in the afterglow of a woman they had failed to see until it was far, far too late. They had their money, their penthouse, and their misery. Anna had herself, and she had finally, truly won. And there you have it, a story of how the deepest betrayals can forge the most incredible strength. Anna's journey wasn't just about a physical glow-up. It was about reclaiming her soul. She shows us that your value is never determined by someone else's inability to see your worth. Julian and Chloe were left with the hollow shell of their choices, while Anna built an ember from the rubble they left behind. What did you think of her epic comeback? Who was the real villain in this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of real-life drama and powerful transformations, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching.